It is a crazy, crazy time in Husker sports, so we can catch up on all the latest there. Bryan, I don't know about you, but I feel like I just refresh Twitter every 10 minutes just to see if something new is happening.
Oh my goodness! I tell you what, you just brought up my real soft point this morning, because I don't know how much Twitter I've really been on. I've been just finished up the visitor preview. I've been answering questions about this morning's Tunnel Talk, which we cover so much ground in, and it's been really great feedback. It's so nice. I think maybe you guys would agree that it seems like some of this bad feels about coaching hires and where they were currently at with the season and whatever. It seems like we've turned the page, and it seems like people are optimistically back in. I think that the defensive coordinator hire, although it wasn't the name anybody was kind of talking about, really have people interested about what's kind of happening there. And then you've got 3 really good portal transfer guys coming in this weekend, as well as a number of 13 other official visitors this weekend. So I think people right now are turning the page to being optimists about what Matt Rule is doing right now in Lincoln.
Yeah, it's, it is the offseason. You got to get to the Kool-Aid eventually, and that's where we are. And I can't wait for a few commits, whether it's out of the portal or just naturally out of high school, to really get the Kool-Aid flowing and we can get behind it. But I know a lot of people were surprised by that hire yesterday that you mentioned. Tony White coming over from Syracuse as the defensive coordinator. They also lost their offensive coordinator yesterday, if you're a Syracuse fan. Sorry about that. But for Nebraska, I guess there's a lot of questions that go into that. Let's start with this one. As we know it, and rosters can change at any time. Does Nebraska have the personnel to play the 3-3-5?
Great question. The 3-3-5, I think the more I've kind of read about it, I think it was really kind of designed, more Big 12-ish, to keep, to defend teams that were in the fun and gun and spread them out wide and increase the athleticism there on the football field by kind of creating this hybrid spot, which I would, commonly just kind of go back and point to people and say that was JoJo Doman, or that was Eric Hagg, if you wanted to talk about going way back in the day. I think that you're short at a couple of spots, and I'm sure Nebraska is more than well aware of where those kind of soft spots are. But I mean, like a Latrevian McCutcheon, who Nebraska is trying to work into a midweek official visit next week, could play that hybrid spot somewhere between, being a full-blown outside linebacker and really, an oversized kind of safety. Guy that can match up well with a tight end, a guy that can match up well with a running back, can run and can hit and can play in space and can do some man-to-man stuff, and you could also blitz him. That's what I think you get with McCutcheon. But I think the other thing, whenever you bring in that odd front and you've got that 3 sitting there, you've always got that guy that has to sit on the 0 at the nose. That's tough. There hasn't been a guy like that in Nebraska, realistically going back to like Darian Daniels, and his brother even. I mean, those are some guys that are just kind of space eaters, go in there, work on the A gap, and I think you can get really creative, however, still with those 2 outside, defensive end positions and what else you do with the linebackers. You can bring pressure from various spots there. And that may be like the most intriguing thing about that 3-3 is that you can do so many different things when it comes up to your alignments and when it comes up to your blitzes and when it comes into just like your technique and how you want to do things. I mean, you could have guys at your defensive end spot with hand in the dirt or standing there in a 2-point. It really is going to look very, very different. I hope and Nebraska fans, are interested in seeing that and understanding more about it. But there's some great stuff out there when it comes to understanding the 3-3-5 and what kind of goes into it. Because 3-3 stack has never been my thing. It's very, the 4-2-5 similar in the back end, obviously, but you kind of lose some of that obviously up front with those front 6 guys. So that 3-3-5, you might get a little easier with getting those defensive end guys to Nebraska because you're not looking for that elusive 7 in a 4-3. And obviously, but you now are looking for that elusive 0 on that 3-3 stack.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how Nebraska kind of changes their recruiting, the different athletes they go after, and just to watch it develop over the years if it's going to be a fit for the Big Ten. But as far as this weekend, they've got a lot of names to kind of go down and go through, and each of them kind of tells a story of them, in and of themselves. Let's start at the quarterback position. I know a lot of people are interested in Jeff Sims, 3-year starter at Georgia Tech, dual threat quarterback. The Casey Thompson decision still kind of looms out there. What do you make of Jeff Sims' interest in Nebraska and if he's visiting this weekend?
Well, I think that what it really tells you, the story that it tells you, is that that quarterback room isn't what it isn't on paper what it really is. I think that you've got not only just the questions about who returns. I think you also have to start bringing in about the availability of some of those players when it comes to spring. You've got 2-3 guys that have had surgeries, basically since the end of the season. Some of those guys, or one of those guys at least, should be more ready to get into the spring kind of fold versus the other two. And when you start talking about shoulder surgeries with quarterbacks, labrum tears, depending on how bad it is, partials just get kind of cleaned up, but full tears with anchors, 6-month recoveries. And that's for like the standard, human beings. And I granted these guys are D1 athletes and they are probably way better at healing up than a 50-year-old man sitting here talking on the radio. But I would sit there and say also, though, the quarterback aspect is interesting because some things, they change. The groove on in the shoulder can change, and you could have different release points now because of what happens surgically within that shoulder. So I think that there's some things that they are going to have to go back out and kind of refigure about themselves when it comes to coming off that injury and coming through rehab. So Sims represents, I think, that part where I just didn't feel like Matt Rule would be interested in going into the spring knowing that he just was down so many people and didn't have that availability, for a guy to kind of come in and just kind of pick it all up. It's an important spring. You have a new head coach, a new OC, had the same problems last year with some of the same guys, Casey Thompson this time, Purdy this time, Harburg this time. And now you need to get some guys there in the spring and get them going to be ready to go into summer conditioning and into fall camp.
That's fascinating. Does Sims? I mean, he obviously fits the starter mold.
Yep.
Do you think that they maybe could pull off Sims and Casey Thompson?
It's possible. NIL becomes a problem, and what you're going to do there, you got this payroll, you got this salary cap, or whatever you want to kind of call it, and obviously you want guys that are earning to have a role, when it comes to what they're doing with the team. That's the first part. Obviously, there's only one football out there at one single time. So when you've got two kind of portal transfer quarterbacks, it had to be balanced last year, and it came in handy, for Nebraska. But maybe that's kind of the roadmap there a little bit, is that you just never know when you're going to get put into a situation where you're going to need a guy to come off the bench because of injury, because of just going out there and not having your day. And you want a guy that has some of that experience. I think there's some talent down the roster still, and I think that's something that Nebraska understands as well. There's just a lack of experience there, and you got to get them into the system, and you got to see how things are going to go. And I think you have to then feel like that room is going to have a shakeup, every single year, no matter what.
How about the big offensive tackle coming over from Rhode Island? Is I know there are a lot of people with offers on him. Is Nebraska one of the first visits for him?
I believe he is the first visit. That Nebraska is the first visit. He's actually technically in town right now. Johnny Cornelius from Rhode Island. He's out of New York, I think, originally. I can't remember off the top of my head. White Plains, I think. So, or maybe that's New Jersey. No, White Plains, New York. He should be already there on campus. I think it was a Thursday, Friday, back out to Oregon after that. And I think Nebraska's in a good spot there. I think the NIL, the opportunity, and obviously offensive tackle is such a huge need for Nebraska when it comes to this class. I think quarterback has been elevated. I think tackle's been there as the number one spot, but I think it's really, they've settled on on this guy, and they're still kind of, they've got 3 in-state kids or 4 in-state guys right now, and they're working on a 5th in Mason Goldman, and they're still kind of plugging around and looking for some other guys around, and help. They've offered another one last night in Texas. So I think offensive tackle is certainly on the board, particularly now that you've got, who your offensive line coach is, and you understand what it is, kind of looking back at the roster, what you have to do to address that for next season.
Of the other visitors this weekend, who do you think is kind of holds the most importance? Obviously, Tristan Alvano is of interest. Malachi Coleman, Elijah Judy. I mean, it's such a big weekend that you'd love to get the whole, the haul, get all of them. But who do you think is kind of the most important of the visitors this weekend?
Well, you gotta further demonstrate things to Malachi Coleman. That's a guy we've seen his stock soar since backing off his commitment. He's had Colorado and other teams, there checking him out. He was in Lincoln last Sunday, going to be there again on Saturday. Interesting that Cameron Lenhart's back into the picture for Nebraska. Jalen Lloyd. So the in-state guys there, Jalen Lloyd, and Tristan Alvano, interesting guys. Alvano with the leg clutch guy, Lloyd with the speed. You got to find a tight end, replacement for Bramer. Enter Andrew Metzger, who is the Colorado commitment. You're looking for help opposite the guys like Cornelius that you're bringing in the portal. So you bring in a Kai Wallen who could play either outside linebacker, edge, or as a defensive end, like hand in the dirt in a 3-3. And then, you lost Yant. And I think that there's still some things that are pending to kind of happen in that running back room, potentially, right? Maybe you got Grant going pro. Maybe A.J. Allen gets an idea that he wants to take a look around. But Quentin Ives is coming in from New Jersey, and I think that he's a bigger guy. He's not really the guy I kind of look for as a running back, but tremendous athlete, can do running back or wide receiver. But the Huskers definitely seem to be setting up on him as a running back for this class.
I know one other name that people are going to be interested out of the portal. I don't think he's had, signed up for a visit or anything yet, but I know he got an offer. Was Keegan Johnson, of course, legacy kid that played for Iowa. Where do you see Nebraska fitting in there? Because I know that he's got some pretty good offers.
Yeah. Obviously, I think it's a tremendous sign that Nebraska has gone that far and made that offer. I think it's going to be something, obviously, it's caught his eye. I think we will be talking about Keegan, potentially getting over to Nebraska and taking a look around. The thing to remember here with these portal transfer guys they have until the middle of January. And there's not going to be a letter of intent signing, for them, December 21st. And there's not going to be another one in February. They're just going to be enrolled. And then all of a sudden you're just going to see them in the UNL directory. So that's the part there I think that people are kind of missing about. And I think that we'll kind of get into that again as you kind of open things back up again after the holidays in the month of January.
Bryan Munson of Husker Online and On3 joining us here to break down a big recruiting weekend for Nebraska. Lots going on all together for Nebraska. The Ernest Hausman transfer, obviously, or transfer portal is scary for Nebraska, and he's one of their best young players. And then you see the potential that he could go to Iowa, a little bit more frightening. But I kind of had this question. For him coming out of high school, I know he wasn't expected maybe to have the season he was. Is he getting more looks probably from higher end programs now after flashing at Nebraska, or is these the same programs that we're looking at him coming out of high school?
I think a little of both. I think obviously when you put the film on, that's a guy that got better week over week. Particularly when you start talking about the game in the big house. I think even like the commentators were like going, "Who is this Hausman kid?"
Yeah.
And I don't think you have to go too long like into the game to hear comments like that, to where if you're a Division I college coach or a buddy of a guy that is and a fan, you turn back around and go, "Hey, this guy really flashed in this game here. Go ahead and take a look at him." So I don't think that I don't think there's any poaching or any type of like shenanigans that people kind of like have conspiracy theory together with Hausman. I think that this has kind of come to be, and I think people have to kind of accept it that, he will not be back. It won't be a Jamari Butler kind of situation like you saw today. And, he's now taking these trips. I completely believe that he will also take a trip at some point to Michigan. And that will be ironic because that was kind of that coming out national scene party kind of thing for him. And I think people really understand now how great of a player, that he is or is going to be. And that's what makes it more difficult for Nebraska fans.
We always encourage you too, guys. If you have questions for Bryan, you can text them in on the Starter Heyman text line 402-464-5685. Tiny Pig wondering, Bryan, if you've heard anything or you anticipate the new defensive coordinator, Tony White, bringing any Syracuse transfers with him. Have you heard any news on that front?
Good question. I mean, because that was I read a couple of articles that have been kind of fascinating just because he was so off the radar, that nobody was really talking about him. And then you read about statistically where, the Orangemen were really at, when it came to their defense and how well they were producing and stuff like that. So I don't know anybody directly tied to either last year's team that is transferring out, portal transfer that he wanted to bring along with him necessarily, or any commits that were on their list. I think it's kind of ironic that there is a guy that popped up here in the last week or so that's going to be visiting Syracuse, although he's kind of more of an offensive lineman, and you mentioned earlier that they lost their OC and their DC. So that's a team that's kind of trying to pick up the pieces and recruit and try to put this class together. So a really difficult time for them. But I don't know of anybody right now directly related to that. It wouldn't be surprising, however, if it does pop up, and there's plenty of time for it to do so.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to follow. These guys that are coaching, or we'll see the staff get finished up if they already have some connections with recruits to bring along with them, or current players, of course. Bryan, we know you're very busy. Better not take all your time, but we want to once again thank you so much for joining the Ticket Water Cooler and bring your insight and entertainment as usual. Bryan Munson of Husker Online and On3. Try not to get too busy, I suppose, as the weekend unfolds.
We won't, and there's actually a really good visitor preview I just published before you called. So go out there and get your summary for what's going on this weekend out there in Husker Online.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Bryan.
See you guys.
All right, there he goes. Bryan Munson, Husker Online and On3. Yeah, you've got just excellent coverage over there from Husker Online. If you're not a part of that, go over there and check that out. It's a peek into a lot of things there, so it's a lot of fun. All right, let's take a quick break. We have Rico actually streaming in. He's of course my usual co-host here. Had a little deal that he had to work with at home, so now he's going to stream in, and we'll hear from Rico. We've got a big weekend ahead. Of course, the college football awards were handed out. The Heisman will be handed out this weekend. Jamari Butler returning to Nebraska. We'll touch on all that stuff coming up next year on the Ticket Water Cooler on 93.7 The Ticket and theticketfm.com.